Chapter 23. How Flatterers Must be Shunned. I must not omit an important subject, and a mistake which princes can with difficulty avoid if they are not very prudent, or if they do not make a good choice. And this is with regard to flatterers, of which courts are full, because men take such pleasure in their own things, and deceive themselves about them, that they can with difficulty guard against this plague, and by wishing to guard against if they run the risk of becoming contemptible. Because there is no other way of guarding oneself against flattery than by letting men understand that they will not offend you by speaking the truth. But when everyone can tell you the truth, you lose their respect. A prudent prince must therefore take a third course, by choosing in his state wise men, and giving these alone full liberty to speak the truth to him, but only of those things that he asks, and of nothing else. But he must ask them about everything, and hear their opinion, and afterwards deliberate by himself in his own way, and in these councils, and with each of these men comport himself so that every one may see that the more freely he speaks, the more he will be acceptable. Outside these, he should listen to no one, go about the matter deliberately, and be determined in his decisions. Whoever acts otherwise either acts precipitately through flattery, or else changes often through the variety of opinions, from which it happens that he is little esteemed. I will give a modern instance of this. Preluca, a follower of Maximilian, the present emperor, speaking of his majesty, said that he never took counsel with anybody, and yet that he never did anything as he wished. This arose from his following the contrary method to the aforesaid. As the emperor is a secret man, he does not communicate his designs to anyone or take anyone's advice, but as on putting them into effect they begin to be known and discovered, they begin to be opposed by those he has about him, and he is easily diverted from his purpose. Hence it comes to pass that what he does one day he undoes the next, so no one ever understands what he wishes or intends to do, and no reliance is to be placed on his deliberations. A prince, therefore, ought always to take counsel, but only when he wishes, not when others wish. On the contrary, he ought to discourage absolutely attempts to advise him unless he asks it, but he ought to be a great asker, and a patient hearer of the truth about those things which he has inquired of. Indeed, if he finds that anyone has scruples in telling him the truth, he should be angry. And since some think that a prince who gains the reputation of being prudent is so considered, not by his nature, but by the good counselors he has about him, they are undoubtedly deceived. It is an infallible rule that a prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised, unless by chance he left himself entirely in the hands of one man who ruled him in everything, and happened to be a very prudent man. In this case he may doubtless be well governed, but it would not last long, for that governor would in a short time deprive him of the state. But by taking counsel with many, a prince who is not wise will never have united counsels, and will not be able to unite them for himself. The counselors will all think of their own interests, and he will be unable either to correct or to understand them. And it cannot be otherwise, for men will always be false to you unless they are compelled by necessity to be true. Therefore it must be concluded that wise counsels, from whoever they come, must necessarily be due to the prudence of the prince, and not the prudence of the prince to the good counsels received. Chapter 24. Why the princes of Italy have lost their states. The before mentioned things, if prudently observed, make a new prince seem ancient, and render him at once more secure and firmer in the state than if he had been established there of old. For a new prince is much more observed in his actions than a hereditary one, and when these are recognized as virtuous, he gains men more, and they are more bound to him than if he were of the ancient blood. For men are much more taken by present than by past things, and when they find themselves well off in the present, they enjoy it and seek nothing more. On the contrary, they will do all they can to defend him, so long as the prince is not in other things wanting to himself. And thus he will have the double glory of having founded a new realm and adorned it and fortified it with good laws, good arms, good friends, and good examples, as he will have double shame who was born a prince and through want of prudence has lost it. And if one considers those rulers who have lost their position in Italy in our days, such as the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and others, one will find in them first a common defect as to their arms, for the reasons discussed at length. Then we observed that some of them either had the people hostile to them, or that if the people were friendly, they were not able to make sure of the nobility, for without these defects, states are not lost that have enough strength to be able to keep an army in the field. Philip of Macedon, not the father of Alexander the Great, but the one who was conquered by Titus Quintius, did not possess a great state compared to the greatness of Rome and Greece's which assailed him, but being a military man and one who knew how to divert the people and make sure of the great, he was able to sustain the war against them for many years, and if at length he lost his power over several cities, he was still able to keep his kingdom. Therefore, those of our princes who had held their possessions for many years must not accuse fortune for having lost them, but rather their own negligence, for having never in quiet times considered that things might change, as it is a common fault of men not to reckon on storms in fair weather. When adverse times came, they only thought of fleeing from them instead of defending themselves, and hoped that the people, enraged by the insolence of the conquerors, would recall them. This measure, when others are wanting, is good, but it is very bad to have neglected the other remedies for that one. For nobody would desire to fall because he believed that he would then find someone to pick him up. This may or may not take place, and if it does, it is not with safety to you, as that defense is known to be cowardly and not to be depended on, and only those defenses are good, certain, and durable, which depend only on yourself and your own ability. Chapter 25. How much fortune can do in human affairs and how it may be opposed. It is not unknown to me how many have been and are of opinion that worldly events are so governed by the fortune and by God that men cannot by their prudence change them, and that on the contrary there is no remedy whatever, and for this they may judge it to be useless to toil much about them, but let things be ruled by chance. This opinion has been more believed in our day, from the great changes that have been seen and are daily seen, beyond every human conjecture. When I think about them at times, I am partly inclined to share this opinion. Nevertheless, that our free will may not all be altogether extinguished, I think it may be true that fortune is the ruler of half our actions, but that she allows the other half or a little less to be governed by us. I would compare her to an impetuous river that, when turbulent, inundates the plains, ruins trees and buildings, removes earth from this side and places it on the other. Everyone flies before it, and everything yields to its fury without being able to oppose it. And yet, though it is of such a kind, still when it is quiet, men can make provisions against it by dams and banks, so that when it rises it will either go into a canal or its rush will not be so wild and dangerous. It happens similarly with fortune, which shows her power where no measures have been taken to resist her, and turns her fury where she knows that no dams or barriers have been made to hold her. And if you regard Italy, which has been the seat of these changes, and who has given the impulse to them, you will see her to be a country without dams or barriers of any kind. If she had been protected by proper measures, like Germany, Spain, and France, this inundation would not have caused the great changes that it has, or would not have happened at all. This must suffice as regards opposition to fortune in general. But limiting myself more to particular cases, I would point out how one sees a certain prince today fortunate and tomorrow ruined, without seeing that he has changed in character or otherwise. I believe this arises in the first place from the causes that we have already discussed at length, that is to say, because the prince who bases himself entirely on fortune is ruined when fortune varies. I also believe that he is happy whose mode of processing accords with the needs of the times, and similarly, he is unfortunate whose mode of proceeding is opposed to the times. For one sees that men in those things which led them to the aim that each one has in view, namely glory and riches, proceed in various ways, one with circumspection, another when with impetuosity, one by violence, another by cunning, one with patience, another with the reverse, and each by these diverse ways may arrive at his aim. One sees also two cautious men, one of whom succeeds in his designs, and the other not. And in the same way, two men succeed equally by different methods, one being cautious, the other impetuous, which arises only from the nature of the times, which does or does not conform to their method of proceeding. From this results, as I have said, that two men, acting differently, attain the same effect, and of two others acting in the same way, one arrives at his good and not the other. From this depend also the changes in fortune, for if it happens that time and circumstances are favorable to one who acts with caution and prudence, he will be successful. But if time and circumstances change, he will be ruined, because he does not change his mode of proceeding. No man is found able to adapt himself to this, either because he cannot deviate from that to which his nature disposes him, or else because having always prospered by walking in one path, he cannot persuade himself that it is well to leave it. And therefore the cautious man, when it is time to act suddenly, does not know how to do so and is consequently ruined. For if one could change one's nature with time and circumstances, fortune would never change. Pope Julius II acted impetuously in everything he did, and found the times and conditions so in conformity with that mode of proceeding that he always obtained a good result. Consider the first war that he made against Bologna, while Messer Giovanni Bentivogli was still living. The Venetians were not pleased with it. The King of Spain and likewise France had objections to this enterprise, notwithstanding which with his fierce and impetuous disposition he engaged personally in the expedition. This move caused both Spain and the Venetians to halt and hesitate, the latter through fear, the former through the desire to regain the entire kingdom of Naples. On the other hand, he engaged with him the King of France, because seeing him makes this move and desiring his friendship in order to put down the Venetians, that king judged that he could not refuse him his troops without manifest injury. Thus Julius, by his impetuous move, achieved what no other pontiff with the utmost human prudence would have succeeded in doing, because if he had waited till all arrangements had been made and everything settled before leaving Rome, as any other pontiff would have done, it would never have taken place. For the King of France would have found 1,000 excuses, and the others would have inspired him with 1,000 fears. I will omit his other actions, which were all of this kind and which all succeeded well, and the shortness of his life did not suffer him to experience the contrary, for had time succeeded in which it was necessary to act with caution, his ruin would have resulted, for he would never have deviated from these methods to which his nature disposed him. I conclude then that fortune varying and men remaining fixed in their ways, they are successful so long as these ways conform to each other. But when they are exposed to each other, then they are unsuccessful. I certainly think that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, for fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to master her, to conquer her by force, and it can be seen that she lets herself be overcome by these rather than by those who proceed coldly. And therefore, like a woman, she is a friend to the young, because they are less cautious, fiercer, and master her with greater audacity. Chapter 26. Exhortation to liberate Italy from the barbarians. Having now considered all the things we have spoken of, and thought within myself whether at present the time was not propitious in Italy for a new prince, and if there was not a state of things which offered an opportunity to a prudent and capable man to introduce a new system that would do honor to himself and good to the mass of the people, it seems to me that so many things concur in favor of a new ruler that I do not know of any time more fitting for such an enterprise. And if, as I said, it was necessary, in order that the power of Moses should be displayed, that the people of Israel should be slaves in Egypt, and to give scope for the greatness and courage of Cyrus, that the Persians should be oppressed by the Medes, and to illustrate the preeminence of Theseus, that the Athenians should be dispersed, so at the present time, in order that the might of an Italian genius might be recognized, it was necessary that Italy should be reduced to her present condition, and that she should be more enslaved than the Hebrews, more oppressed than the Persians, and more scattered than the Athenians, without a head, without order, beaten, despoiled, lacerated, and overrun. and that she should have suffered ruin of every kind. And although before now a spirit has been shown by some which gave hope that he might be appointed by God for her redemption, yet at the highest summit of his career he was thrown aside by fortune, so that now, almost lifeless, she awaits one who may heal her wounds and put a stop to the raping and pillaging of Lombardy, to the rapacity and extortion in the kingdom and in Tuscany, and cure her of those sores which have been long festering. Behold now, she prays God to send some one to redeem her from this barbarous cruelty and insolence. Behold her ready and willing to follow any standard if only there be someone to raise it. There is nothing now she can hope for, but that your illustrious house may place itself at the head of this redemption, being by its power and fortune so exalted, and being favored by God and the Church, whose leadership it now occupies. Nor will this be very difficult to you if you call to mind the actions and lives of the men I have named. And although those men were rare and marvelous, they were none the less men, and had each of them less occasion than the present, for their enterprise was not juster than this, nor easier, nor was God more their friend than he is yours. Here is a just cause, for that war is just which is necessary, and those arms are merciful where no hope exists save in them. Here is the greatest willingness, nor can there be great difficulty where there is great willingness, provided that the measures are adopted of those whom I have set before you as examples. Besides this, unexampled wonders have been seen here performed by God. The sea has been opened, a cloud has shown you the road, the rock has given forth water, manna has rained, and everything has contributed to your greatness. The remainder must be done by you. God will not do everything, in order not to deprive us of free will and the portion of his glory that falls to our lot. It is no marvel that none of the before mentioned Italians have done that which it is to be hoped your illustrious house may do. And if in so many revolutions in Italy and so many warlike operations, it always seems as if the military capacity were extinct, this is because the ancient methods were not good, and no one has arisen who knew how to discover new ones. Nothing does so much honor to a newly risen man than the new laws and measures which he introduces. These things, when they are well based and have greatness in them, render him revered and admired, and there is not lacking scope in Italy for the introduction of every kind. Here there is great virtue in the members, if it were not wanting in the heads. Look how in duels and in councils of a few the Italians are superior in strength, dexterity, and intelligence. But when it comes to armies, they make a poor show, which proceeds entirely from the weakness of the leaders. For those that know are not obedient, and everyone thinks that he knows, there being hitherto nobody who has raised himself so high both by valor and fortune as to make the others yield. Hence it comes about that in all this time, in all the wars waged during the last 20 years, whenever there has been an army entirely Italian, it has always been a failure, as witness first Taro, then Alexandria, Capua, Genoa, Viala, Bologna, and Mestre. If your illustrious house, therefore, wishes to follow those great men who redeemed their countries, it is before all things necessary, as the true foundation of every undertaking, to provide yourself with your own forces, for you cannot have more faithful or truer and better soldiers. And although each one of them may be good, they will together become better when they see themselves commanded by their prince and honored and supported by him. It is therefore necessary to prepare such forces in order to be able, with Italian prowess, to defend the country from foreigners. And although both the Swiss and Spanish infantry are deemed terrible, nonetheless they each have their defects, so that a third order might not only oppose them, but be confident of overcoming them. For the Spaniards cannot sustain the attack of cavalry, and the Swiss have to fear infantry, which meets them with resolution equal to their own, from which it has resulted, as will be seen by experience, that the Spaniards cannot sustain the attack of French cavalry, and the Swiss are overthrown by Spanish infantry. And although a complete example of the latter has not been seen, yet an instance was furnished in the Battle of Ravenna, where the Spanish infantry attacked the German battalions, which observed the same order as the Swiss. The Spaniards, through their bodily agility and aided by their bucklers, had entered between and under the pikes and were in a position to attack them safely without the Germans being able to defend themselves. And if the cavalry had not charged them, they would have utterly destroyed them. Knowing therefore the defects of both these kinds of infantry, a third kind can be created which can resist cavalry and need not fear infantry, and this will be done not by the creation of armies, but by a change of system. And these are the things which, when newly introduced, give reputation and grandeur to a new prince. This opportunity must not therefore be allowed to pass, for letting Italy at length see her liberator, I cannot express the love with which he would be received in all those provinces which have suffered under these foreign invasions, with what thirst for vengeance, with what steadfast faith, with what love, with what grateful tears. What doors would be closed against him? What people would refuse him obedience? What envy could oppose him? What Italian rebel would rebel against him? What Italian would rebel against him? This barbarous domination stinks in the nostrils of everyone. May your illustrious house therefore assume this task with that courage and those hopes which are inspired by a just cause, so that under its banner our fatherland may be raised up, and under its auspices be verified that saying of Petrarch, "Valor against fell wrath will take up arms and be the combat quickly sped. For sure, the ancient worth that in Italians stirs the heart is not yet dead." The end.